You've likely experienced that strange disconnection at work, sitting in your home office or at a hot desk, technically connected to everyone through Slack and Zoom, yet feeling more isolated than ever. Your colleagues have become thumbnails on a screen. The casual hallway conversations that used to break up your day have vanished. You're living through one of the biggest workplace experiments in history, and its results are just starting to become clear. This video traces how Silicon Valley discovered that remote work was eroding something they hadn't realized was so fragile: the invisible architecture of collaboration. You'll see why companies with the most advanced technology and the deepest pockets for remote work infrastructure are now the ones most aggressively pulling employees back. The lessons here go beyond where you work. They're about recognizing what makes work meaningful and how human connection shapes everything from daily tasks to breakthrough ideas. All right, let's get started and dive into why offices are more important than you think. Let's start by taking a moment to think back to the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. You might recall how suddenly work changed. The daily commute became a short walk to the kitchen table. In-person meetings turned into grids of faces on screens. During those early days, this new reality felt like an acceleration into the future. Tech giants led the charge, the very companies that had built the tools making remote work possible. When Twitter announced employees could work from home forever, it seemed to confirm what many suspected: the traditional office was obsolete. By 2021, almost every major tech company had followed suit, declaring you could work from home and your home could be anywhere. A powerful promise of flexibility and autonomy. Yet this declaration contradicted everything on which these companies had built their empires. Take Google, for example. By the early 2020s, it had become the world's most desirable employer through innovation and legendary office environments. Its campuses were worlds unto themselves, complete with fabulous food, yoga classes, video games, even nap stations. These perks served a calculated business purpose. The environment was engineered to keep you on site, comfortable, and interacting with colleagues. The core belief was that true innovation happens in spontaneous conversations by the coffee machine, chance hallway encounters, shared lunches that spark unexpected ideas. These companies had invested billions believing physical proximity was their secret ingredient to success. However, a subtle reversal soon began in Silicon Valley. The first sign the remote work honeymoon was ending. If you moved somewhere with a lower cost of living, your pay would be adjusted downward. Then, informal suggestions to come into the office became formal policies. By 2021, employers started requiring you to be in the office at least a few days weekly, giving rise to hybrid work. A year later, these rules tightened further. Google, once the paragon of campus life, mandated 3 office days and began tracking attendance, warning employees that presence would directly affect performance appraisals. Employees who had received approval for permanent remote work were told their status would be reevaluated. The shift was clear. The grand experiment was being reined in, and the reasons were strategic. Companies with the most advanced technology and the most to gain from distributed workforces were leading the charge back to physical workspaces. They had seen something in their operations, in work quality, and in cultural health that was deeply concerning. The initial euphoria had faded, replaced by growing recognition that something was being lost. The problem worrying Silicon Valley leaders couldn't be spotted on quarterly reports. Work was getting done, emails got answered, projects completed, digital gears turned smoothly. The issue was far more subtle, a quiet erosion happening beneath the surface. Thousands of small human interactions that together form the collaborative engine of successful organizations were slowly breaking down. So what was actually going wrong beneath the surface? Let's start off by imagining a simple office frustration: getting an expense report approved. In a physical office, when your reimbursement gets denied, you walk down to accounting. You find the person who sent the email, stick your head into their cubicle, and in 2 minutes you figure out the issue. People are almost always more reasonable when they're looking at each other. Now picture that same scenario remotely. You send a message into a digital void. Perhaps a week later, you receive a curt reply citing a rule that seems irrelevant. You fire back a response that sounds more frustrated than you intended. Another week passes. The interaction becomes impersonal, inefficient, adversarial. This tiny friction, multiplied across an entire organization thousands of times daily, signals a much larger problem. This problem is the death of what the authors call the drive-by. In an office, you're constantly seeking and giving help without scheduling it. You pop into a colleague's office with a quick question, overhear a conversation that solves a problem you've been stuck on, or grab someone in the hallway for their opinion. In a remote setting, every spontaneous moment must be formalized. That quick question becomes a scheduled 15-minute video call. The plea for help becomes another message in an already overflowing inbox, easy to ignore or postpone. The barrier to both seeking and providing assistance grows exponentially. Research has found that a face-to-face request is 34 times more effective than one sent by email. The informal, low-friction system of human connection that kept work flowing smoothly was replaced by a slow, clunky bureaucracy of scheduled interactions. Beyond this loss of efficiency lies something far greater, an innovation deficit. Truly new ideas rarely emerge from scheduled brainstorming sessions. They're born of unplanned collisions of different perspectives. One study found that teams working together in person generate 15 to 20% more ideas than virtual counterparts. Microsoft's own internal data showed company-wide remote work created a more static, siloed organization with fewer connections among different teams. People talked almost exclusively to those they already knew, killing the cross-pollination that breeds real breakthroughs. When you separate people, you lose the creative spark. So if fully remote work was clearly failing to support collaboration, surely the hybrid model, the supposed best of both worlds, must be the answer. So if fully remote work was clearly failing to support collaboration, surely the hybrid model must be the answer. It felt like the perfect, logical compromise that nearly everyone settled on. It promised the best of both worlds. Deep focus and personal flexibility of working from home, combined with the creative energy and social connection of being in the office. This was an appealing vision, a sustainable path forward that seemed to solve all the problems created by the pandemic. This entire vision was built on a single, flawed assumption that when you came into the office, your colleagues would be there too. The reality of the hybrid trap, as you may have experienced, is often one of disappointment. You make the decision to go in, tackling the commute you had gladly left behind, anticipating a day of productive, face-to-face collaboration. When you arrive, you're greeted by a sea of empty desks. Your key team members chose that day to work from home. So you find your assigned temporary spot, put on your headphones, and spend the day in the exact same virtual meetings you would have taken from your kitchen table. The only difference is that now you have a commute. The promise of connection evaporates, replaced by the frustrating realization that you have simply changed the location of your remote work. After this happens a few times, you learn a lesson. There is very little point in making the effort to come in at all. This feeling is amplified by the fact that the destination itself is no longer what it once was. The office you're returning to is likely a degraded version of the one you left. During the pandemic, many companies saw a golden opportunity to slash one of their biggest expenses, real estate. They made huge, long-term bets on the future of remote work by downsizing their office footprints dramatically. For you, the employee, this had a direct and unwelcome consequence: the end of personal space. Your permanent desk, the one with your pictures, your comfortable chair, your files, was likely eliminated. In its place came the universally disliked practice of hoteling, or hot desking. Now you must log into a system to reserve a generic, temporary workspace for the day, often finding yourself seated among strangers from a completely different department. Your decision to avoid the office is an entirely logical response to a broken system. This gave rise to the widespread phenomenon of coffee badging. You make the trip into the office, swipe your access card to register your attendance, perhaps grab a coffee to be seen, and then promptly turn around and go back home where you can actually get your work done. This behavior is a rational adaptation. It shows a failure of management where leaders have mandated physical presence and completely failed to create an environment where that presence has any meaning, purpose, or tangible benefit. That cynical, frustrating experience of the hybrid trap wastes your time and has a deeper, more corrosive effect. By creating a system in which collective gathering is optional and rules are loosely enforced, it quietly reshapes your entire relationship with your job. The most compelling evidence for this cultural shift comes from a simple phrase, repeated over and over in focus groups. When asked whether the hybrid arrangement was working, the near-universal response was, "The work is getting done." If you listen closely, you can hear a concerning redefinition of what work now means. It no longer refers to the collective effort of a team. Its meaning has shrunk to one thing: my individual tasks are being completed. The unspoken second half is, and that is where my responsibility ends. You can see this new individualism in action every day in what has become the most common feature of remote collaboration, the cameras off norm in virtual meetings. This goes beyond just Zoom fatigue. When your camera is off, you're granted implicit permission to disengage from the collective activity and retreat into your own tasks. You're treating collaboration time as background noise, something secondary to your individual checklist. This small act, repeated in millions of meetings daily, represents a massive transfer of attention away from the team and back toward the self. This mindset extends beyond virtual meetings and fundamentally alters your role within the organization. Without daily reinforcement of informal social bonds, and without the subtle accountability that comes from sharing physical space, your relationship with colleagues becomes purely transactional. You begin operating more like an independent contractor whose only obligation is fulfilling the explicit terms of a contract. Requests for help from other teams are now viewed as interruptions. The social ties that created mutual obligation have frayed, replaced by a colder, more calculated logic. The motivation to cooperate is replaced by the need to protect your own time and hit your own targets. The ultimate cost is that the only work getting done is work that can be easily measured. What's lost is all the unseen, unmeasured work that allows organizations to thrive. Mentoring a new hire, sharing expertise with a struggling colleague, offering ideas for another department, these organizational citizenship behaviors disappear in a transactional culture. They appear on no KPI dashboard, and without the motivation of personal relationships, there's little incentive to perform them. Your company's leaders might think everything is fine. Individual output metrics look stable. Just beneath the surface, the connective tissue of cooperation, mutual support, and shared identity is quietly dissolving. Given this new reality of a fragmented and transactional workforce, leaders are left with a critical choice. You can accept this cultural erosion as the new cost of doing business, or you can begin the difficult work of intentionally rebuilding the connections that have been lost. The simplest path is, of course, to issue a mandate forcing everyone back to the office full-time, but simply demanding physical presence without addressing the underlying purpose is a failure of management. The real task is to actively build a new foundation for connection. The surprising truth is that the motivation is already there. When employees were asked in a 2022 survey what would bring them back to the office, the overwhelming answer was each other. A staggering 85% said they would be motivated to return simply to rebuild their team bonds. If you make one decisive change to combat the transactional mindset, it should be at the very beginning of an employee's tenure. You must treat onboarding as the most critical intervention for building social capital. Connection must be engineered from day one. Start by bringing new employees in as a cohort. By starting their employment together, they immediately form a peer group, a built-in support system. Next, pair each new person with an experienced buddy, their guide, their first friend, the one of whom they can ask stupid questions. This principle of intentional connection cannot end after the first month. It must become the new operating system for the entire organization. Look at your company's calendar as opportunities to build relationships. When a new cross-functional project kicks off, bring the team together in person for a day to build rapport before the hard work begins. The great remote work experiment taught us a humbling lesson. We took the social fabric of our workplaces for granted. We assumed community, trust, and collaboration were automatic byproducts of sharing a building. In fact, they were the result of countless, unplanned, deeply human moments. Now the challenge is building an intentional workplace. This requires shifting focus from where people work to how they connect. It means treating internal relationships as a core business asset that must be actively cultivated and protected. It is a more difficult path than simply sending a memo, and it is the only way to create an organization that is productive, resilient, innovative, and truly built to last.